Luke, back for another course breakdown video, this time for this week's Worldwide Technology Championship at Mayakoba. We're going back to El Camaleon, which is a place that is not only beautiful to the eye, but a place that I have immaculate vibes at. Last year for the Mayakoba Classic, ended up taking down my first ever GPP win for golf. So going to go ahead and flash my lineup here on the screen. Obviously Viktor Hovland broke through for his first ever PGA Tour victory, and we were able to do the same from the GPP side of things. So we're going to look to build on that momentum. Obviously last year's analysis ended up being spot on, and what we're going to do in this video is get you completely prepared for this event. We're going to go through the golf course, the field, we'll talk about some of my key stats for analysis this week, and wrap it up with some of the courses on tour I think are very comparable to El Camaleon, because this is truly a once-in-a-lifetime type of golf course. It's extremely volatile. One hole does not look anything like the next. You're dealing with mangrove forest to seaside cliffs to heavily wooded areas that look a lot like North Carolina rather than something over here in Mexico. So an interesting golf course. You have changing conditions from hole to hole. Wind's in play in some holes, wind isn't in play in other holes. We have hazards off the tee on some, and it's completely wide open at others. So makes for an interesting level of analysis this week. I mean, hell, we even have bunkers that are caves in the middle of fairways here. So truly a once in a lifetime type golf course where accuracy is truly king. So we'll hop right into the preview here. First off with the field for this week's event. First off, for our tournament info, last year's winner was Viktor Hovland, like I mentioned, at 20 under par. Year before that, in 2019, we had Brendan Todd at the same score of 20 under. Years before that, have a ton of short hitters, so you're going to see a little bit of a trend here. Matt Kuchar at 22 under, Pan Kazire at 19 under, Pat Perez at 21 under par, and of course Graham McDowell, his last win on the PGA Tour, they're at 18 under. For this week, we're going to have a full field event. We're going to have 156 golfers at a max, and your typical cut line as well. It's going to be the top 65 in ties making the cut per usual. But the difference this year between last year's Mayakoba Classic and this year's Worldwide Technologies Championship is we have an insane field this time around. In years past, we've seen JT be the headliner in the field. A few other of the top 50 players come over here, but not really much more than that. This year, it's absolutely littered with the best players in the world. So first and foremost, JT, who is always at this event, will be teeing it up this time around. We have past champion Viktor Hovland. We have Abraham Ancer, Tony Finau. We have Terrell Hatton, Billy Horschel. We even have Brooks Koepka coming this time around. We have Scotty Scheffler, Patrick Reed, Matthew Wolff, Shane Lowry, Will Zalatoris, and that's just naming a few. Essentially a who's who of the best golfers in the world. I mean, we don't have DJ, we don't have Rahm or any of those guys teeing it up, but aside from maybe those top 6 or 7 golfers in the world, pretty much everyone teeing it up. This is by far the strongest field in tournament history. So not only do we get some nice pricing over in Draftkings, if DFS is your thing, we also get some very interesting numbers in terms of gambling, right? Typically, a lot of the numbers we get for this field are a lot lower. We're dealing with guys in the 20s to 30s that we're trying to bet. But this time around, since we have so much top-end talent, there's definitely some shots a little bit further down the board we can take. So interesting from a betting side, particularly from DFS as well, if that's your type of thing. Now for our course breakdown. El Camaleon, as I promised before, is one of the most scenic golf courses in the entire world. Like I mentioned, the foliage is a huge variety from hole to hole. There's some holes that look like seaside cliffs, what you'll see over there at Pebble Beach. You have mangrove forest sprinkled in. You have heavily wooded holes that look a lot like a sedge field over there in North Carolina. And overall, you're going to have to stay on top of that from hole to hole. You're going to have holes that are very much so protected from the wind, where wind isn't a factor at all. And then you're going to have some of those seaside holes, especially the ones on the cliffs, where the wind's howling 20, 30 miles an hour. Essentially, the players that are able to adjust to the conditions the best are going to have the most success this week. And on top of that, this is a course that demands accuracy. If you are off in terms of your accuracy here, whether that's off the tee, whether that's into greens, you are going to have a really bad time. Those mangrove forests are extremely penal. If you hit the ball into the water at all, or even around the water with those mangrove forests, you're going to be taking a drop, or at the very least an unplayable. Those roots are extremely gnarly. You can break your wrist on them extremely easy, I would know. Also, this golf course, it deals with a lot of cliffs. If you hit the ball over a cliff, you're obviously dropping. It's just a ton of trouble off the tee. And as much as it's beautiful, it's also just as dangerous. It's par 71 in general, so a relatively short course as well, at just over 7,000 yards. This is a Greg Norman design, and this is designed to be a resort course. So in general, this is going to play easier than most PGA Tour courses. So despite a lot of the trouble off the tee, it's not really a problem if you're keeping it in play. These fairways are relatively easy to hit. They're soft, they're receptive. They also tend to be a lot wider than most on the PGA Tour. The greens here, also extremely receptive. They're very soft. They're 7,000 square feet on average, making them some of the biggest greens on the entire PGA Tour. So if you're on top of your accuracy, if you're on top of your ball striking, this is a place that is easily gettable. Again, the only problem is that if you're just a little bit off with your accuracy, you're going to be putting up double and triple bogeys left and right. A factor that makes that even more so important is the wind. At this golf course, like I mentioned before, from hole to hole, the wind changes drastically. And it's not like the wind is just changing direction magically or anything like that. I mean, we saw that over at Kiawah Island. There were holes where the wind was going one way and on the next hole was going a completely different direction. A lot of that has to do with the slopes of Kiawah Island. You had a lot of bunkering, you had a lot of sand dunes that would funnel wind left and right. That's not the case here. The reason why the wind here is a little bit volatile is the trees. There's holes where it's extremely wooded. It looks like a North Carolina forest, and you're not going to have much effective wind at all. Only the super high ball hitters that hit it above the trees, which is maybe 5 to 10% of the field, might have some type of problem. And then you have those seaside holes where every player in the field is going to feel that wind, and they're going to have some high scores. So overall, having ability to adjust to those conditions is going to be perfect. And obviously that's not something that we can necessarily model, but you will see that with the guys that have success this week. In terms of the greens, like I mentioned before, we have an extremely rare surface here. We have paspalum greens in fairways, which is something we see in some of these tropical type golf courses where you have a lot of salinity in the air, a lot of salt and whatnot. You have to use paspalum grass to live. A lot of times you have Bermuda grass, you have bent grass, that kind of thing. The salt will kill it off. It'll keep it from being completely healthy, that kind of thing. The beauty with paspalum is it can take tons of salinity. So not only do you have very lush grass here, growing very healthy, you also have sandy grass. So kind of like we saw at Kiawah Island, kind of like what you'll see at links golf courses over in England, the soil is very sandy. It's almost like you're hitting out of a fairway bunker when you're hitting out of the fairway, even when you're in it. So there's going to be some players that are very used to those kind of conditions. People like a Victor Hovland that have played well on paspalum in the past. People that are from the Caribbean, people like Emiliano Grillo that are just used to those conditions in general, they're going to adjust much quicker to this type of surface. I mean, obviously you give PGA Tour pros 2 or 3 days to try and figure it out. They're going to do so. But at first you might see a few guys struggle on it. So keep that in mind. Another thing to keep in mind with these paspalum surfaces is that they run extremely slow. You have to keep them watered to keep them alive. They're not like something like bent grass or Bermuda grass where you can kind of let them bake out. They'll survive through the week, that kind of thing. Paspalum will die off as soon as it gets below maybe a 9 or a 10 on the snip meter. So they're going to keep it at right around a 10, 11 and a half at most over here at this golf tournament. Again, there's more sand in this as well. You're not going to be dealing with grain. And in general, these are some easy greens to hit on. I mean, it's a resort golf course. It's why the fairways are easy to hit. It's designed for golfers like you and me. It's not designed for PGA Tour pros. So not only are they really receptive, like I mentioned before, they're also relatively flat. What that means is that we've seen some putters here that aren't necessarily as skilled find some success. You're not dealing with a ton of slopes on the greens. You're dealing with relatively slow greens as well, which tends to make some of the worst putters on tour just a little bit better. So you're going to see that with our key stats. Obviously, some of the worst putters going to be people we actually want to target this week, because on top of not having the problem with the putting, there's some of the better ball strikers on tour. There's some of the people that are going to keep themselves out of that trouble. So this type of golf course, this type of design, it really polarizes the field. There's going to be people that fit the golf course to a T, and then we're going to have some people that don't fit it at all. It's just that kind of golf course where it's really a horses for course type of track. The people that fit it well are going to find some success, and the people that don't have the games designed for it are definitely going to struggle. A few other notes of this golf course before we hop into our key stats is that there's less eagles at this golf course than most golf courses. In fact, it's bottom 5 on the PGA Tour in terms of eagle rate. And you wouldn't necessarily think about that because it's such a short course. It's just over 7,000 yards, so 200 yards longer than what we saw at Port Royal last week, but not many eagles. We saw a ton of eagles at Port Royal, and a lot of that has to do with the dog legs. Rather than this being a very straight up golf course where it's short, you're not having to deal with undulation or anything like that, almost every hole at El Camaleon has a dog leg. They're usually cut off with trees, they're usually cut off with water, everything like that, which makes cutting them off extremely difficult as well. So even though it is a relatively short golf course, you're not going to be taking the ball at greens or anything like that. And the par 5s here at El Camaleon definitely have some length in them. They have some teeth in them. You're not going to be dealing with a 517-yard par 5 that we did at Port Royal or anything like that. All of them are well over 550 yards. Now with all of that in mind, let's hop into our key stats. At number 1 this week, we have shots gained approach, which should not be a surprise to anyone. This is going to be our most important statistic from week to week, pretty much no matter the venue. There's only 1 or 2 venues on the PGA Tour where maybe off the tee might be slightly more important, but that is not the case here at El Camaleon. Like I mentioned before, we have some of the biggest greens on the PGA Tour, which might lead you to think that it's slightly less important. But that's actually not the case. I mean, obviously the wind here is a huge factor, and the guys that tend to be better with their iron play in general tend to do better in the wind. But even more so, this is a golf course where you have to score. We've still seen the winning score approach 20, even 22 under par at times. The reason for that is that these greens are extremely soft. They're easy to hit the ball close, but it's also very easy to make putts. So the guys that can put themselves consistently from that 10 to 15 feet range are going to score very well here. So shots gained approach, obviously not a surprise to find it there at number 1. It is not only going to keep people out of trouble, which is plentiful here at El Camaleon, is going to allow them to go out and score. At number 2, we have driving accuracy, which is kind of going to go hand in hand there with shots gained approach. We have a huge de-emphasis this week on distance. Again, it's only a 7,000 yard course. And if you guys take a look at those past winners, I mean, Brendan Todd, Matt Kuchar, Pat Perez, Graham McDowell, what is the one thing they all have in common? I mean, even Victor Hovland, to be honest with you. They're all relatively short hitters. And while Hovland isn't short for the PGA Tour, he's right around tour average. He's not one of the longer hitters on tour. And at this golf course, you're not going to get that distance boost. A lot of that has to do with the dog legs that exist. A lot of players are having to lay up to the same positions. But even more so, there's just so much trouble off the tee. And the longer you hit it, the more dispersion you're going to have with your driver, the more likely you are to hit it into these hazards. So unlike a lot of scoreable courses where off the tee play isn't as important, where you're kind of able to go out there, bomb and gouge, really take it apart with your irons, that is not the case here. Off the tee accuracy is extremely important. It is extremely correlated to success. And just taking a look at those past winners, you definitely want to make sure your guys are keeping it in play. But for our number 3 key stat, that is going to be birdie or better percentage. This course is going to be a scoring fest. We know that. We've seen a winning score hit 20 under par almost every single time it's been run. I mean, we saw it last year as well. So birdie or better percentage is going to be important, but even more so, I also like it just because of the green types. We're dealing with slow greens. We're dealing with past palm that gives you very easy lies. What that means is that you're going to be getting up and down almost every single time. Past palm, another side effect of it is that it gives you very good lies. It's not like a Bermuda grass. It's not like a bent grass where you can end up getting some tough lies to hit off of. This type of grass, it almost tees up the golf ball. Actually, the golf course I play on at home over here in South Florida has past palm grass. It has to do with the salinity in the air, close enough to the ocean where the salinity can start to kind of kill off the grass. And I can tell you from personal experience, hitting spinning shots off past palm is easy as pie. Even amateurs like me can go ahead, hit some spinning one-hop shots, that kind of thing. It makes getting up and down extremely easy. So you're going to look at a little bit of a de-emphasis on birdie or better non-birdie or better percentage on getting up and down, and more emphasis on birdie or better percentage, right? Getting up there in 2 shots, trying to go out there and score on this golf course. But with that being said, let's talk about some of the stats we're not incorporating this week. Putting is obviously not going to be as important. We're dealing with large greens that are relatively easy. They're going to be running slow as well. And anytime we have a past palm surface, putting is going to be de-emphasized. It's just something that these players aren't used to. The better putters on tour aren't going to have familiarity with this surface unless they're from a tropical climate, which is extremely rare for these PGA Tour players. So putting is not going to be as important. Around the green, we just mentioned that, not going to be important because it's going to be very easy to get up and down. In distance, like we were mentioning with the driving accuracy debate, also going to be a little bit mitigated. You have so many of these dog legs, a relatively short course in general there at just 7,000 yards. So I'm going to be looking at those key stats rather than those 3. Now for our comp courses. First off, for a comp course, we're going to have Port Royal Golf Course, which is where we were last week. Obviously should be very fresh in everyone's minds. Not only do we have a very short golf course, that is a commonality between the two, also windy conditions in a tropical environment. So a lot of similarities between how the courses look, also how they play, dealing with a relatively easy golf course that people typically take to 18, 20 under par, that kind of thing. So I think that's a good comp course there. Another course I'm using as a comp is Sedgefield Country Club. That is where we have the Wyndham Championship as a par 71, just like we have here at El Camaleon. Tight fairways, also dealing with relatively easy to putt greens. So in general, really like that as a comp course there. A lot of the plotters, a lot of the shorter hitters on tour tend to have a lot of success at Sedgefield Country Club. You know, a Webb Simpson, A lot of just shorter players have won there over the years. Same story here at El Camaleon. But lastly, we have Waialae Country Club over at Hawaii. It's just a par 70, so it's not a par 71, but you're dealing with tons of windy conditions there. Relatively short golf course. They're right around 7,000 yards. But most of all, and this is the extremely important part, past Palm greens. We don't see that very often. We see that at the Puerto Rico Open. We see it here at El Camaleon. And then we see it at Waialae, and that's about it. So, like, that is a calm course there. Anyone that's had success at those 3 golf courses is definitely going to see a boost in my model for this week. That's all I've got for this week's course breakdown. Go ahead and let me know down in the comments what you think the winning score this week's going to be. I've personally got 19 under par as my pick. I do see some wind in the forecast for this weekend. Obviously, a little bit early to be considering that, but I think it ends up being just slightly harder than we've seen in years past. But go ahead and let me know what you've got down in the comments. Obviously, the average over the years has been just over 20 under par. So let's go ahead and get some debate going down there. As always, I also appreciate all of your support here on the channel. If you guys haven't already gotten a chance to like the video, if you haven't already gone ahead and subscribed to the channel, I highly recommend that you guys go ahead and do so. We're going to have our Draftkings picks coming out later this week. We're going to have our Draftkings value picks, our fades and sleepers, all of that coming out. So you make sure you guys subscribe so you don't miss any of that. On top of our content that we're putting out every week, we're also going to have our weekly live stream. It's going to be Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern time. Whether you're playing daily fantasy sports, whether you're betting, whether you're just watching the golf tournament in general, hoping to know who wins, make sure to stop on by. I'll be answering any live questions in the chat. We'll be going through the betting board, through my player projections for DFS, all that sort of fun stuff. So until then, good luck with all of your lineups for this week, and I'll see you guys for the live stream.